Hey everyone, Joe Waxman here, the mediocre astrologer. Man, he's okay. What's up, everyone? I hope you're doing better than okay. And in this video, I want to talk about the inconjunct aspect or the quincunx aspect. Before I begin, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Book a reading with me, and you can do that by just emailing me at macrogoldmachine@yahoo.com. All right, so what is the inconjunct or quincunx aspect? Um, it is an interesting aspect, and it's often talked about as being a version when planets are inconjunct from each other. Sometimes people say they're an aversion because the signs, the way that it's usually talked about, the signs have nothing to do with each other. They're not the same modality. They're not the same gender or polarity. They're not the same um, um, element. So they're not the same anything, right? The classic inconjunct is from Aries, and the way I see it is I always measure from Aries. Aries is the starting point of all the aspects, and we can see all the aspects through Aries. I don't particularly like the classical Hellenistic way of measuring aspects through the thema mundi. Now I'll have to make another video about that, explaining why exactly I don't use that. For me, it's much more accurate to look at Aries as the starting point and to measure things from there. And so the inconjunct would be Virgo and Scorpio, or sixth and eighth house, right? From Aries, or the first house. Um, and that brings up a whole nother discussion about signs and houses, which I'll have to make a video about that as well. But for the sake of this video, we're going to use them somewhat interchangeably, I suppose, because they're in the same position. If we put Aries at the helm, Aries at the rising sign, then that's where we start. That's the starting point, right? And we get Virgo on the one side and Scorpio on the other, or sixth house, eighth house on the other. Those are the two inconjunct houses, right? Or signs. And the reason, part of the reason they get their nature, Virgo, Scorpio, is because of their relationship to Aries, right? Virgo being simplest way to understand it, Libra is opposite to Aries. Libra is all about relationships. Aries is all about the self, right? And so you have this polarity where you have relationships and self. And then underneath Libra, you have Virgo, where Virgo is about relationships, but subservient relationships, serving others, right? Coming underneath others, serving others, working for others, being an employee, um, uh, competing with others, right? It's a very sort of um, underling position where you're either serving others or you're trying to get ahead from an underdog position, from a challenging position. So therefore, it brings up competition and all that, right? But Virgo is very submissive. It's a submissive sign, and it can be, right? It's not always submissive. It can be like fighty and aggressive and challenging and competitive, but its basic orientation is coming underneath, right? And that's not, there's nothing wrong with that. I have a Virgo moon. Service is a wonderful quality, right? Um, Service to others. It has a highly spiritual element, right? Drawing from its opposite in Pisces. Then we have Scorpio, which is the other side of Libra, which is the dominant side of the inconjunct, right? And Scorpio is also about relationships, but imbalanced relationships where Scorpio is in the dominant position of um having control over other people's resources, money, psychologically, right? Scorpio is very psychologically dominating. It's dominant in every aspect. It's a very dominant sign, right? And that doesn't mean that Scorpio doesn't have its weaknesses or its vulnerabilities. It does. It periodically goes through crisis or a sort of death and rebirth cycle, shedding its skin, if you will, reinventing itself. So those sort of themes, death and rebirth, right? Sex and sexuality are a very scorpionic eighth house thing, not a fifth house thing. That's wrong. It's eighth house Scorpio because of the death rebirth cycle, right? Sex is a build up and then a release and then a death. Right? This is not nothing to do with number 5, fifth house Leo bullshit. Like, fuck you. You're dumb. So don't come to me with fifth house is sex. That's garbage. You know, you're gonna have sex in a kindergarten. Fuck you. You're dumb if you think that's the same fucking energy. No. Eighth house. It's eighth house. It's sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It's criminality. It's domination, right? It's I have a whole list here about inconjunct relationships, just to further illustrate this. And we're going to go through a bunch of charts, 32 charts. So don't worry. But initially, I just want you to really understand what the Virgo Scorpio 6th, 8th house dynamic really is. The inconjunct. That's what we're talking about. When we're talking about inconjunct quincunx aspect, we're talking about Virgo Scorpio, right? So whenever you see an inconjunct, think Virgo Scorpio. One side Virgo, one side Scorpio, right? And these are relationships that we have in life. You'll know these because everyone experiences these inconjunct relationships. An inconjunct is a relationship, an unequal relationship, right? So whenever you have like an employer-employee relationship, this is a 6th, 8th house relationship, or rather 8th, 6th house relationship, right? Employer would be the 8th house, dominant side. Employee would be the 6th house, right? 8th house can represent bosses, right? 6th house is employees, right? Criminal and their victim. That's an 8th house. If you're getting mugged, that's an 8th house position, and you're the 6th house. If you're being mugged, you're in the 6th house. You're in the submissive side of things, right? You can either fight or pay up, but the dominant side will be the criminal, right? The 8th house is very much criminal orientation, right? Taking other people's money, bank robbers, thieves, criminals, extortion, mobsters, all these things. 8th house. The bully and their victim, very similar theme in the schoolyard. These are all inconjunct situations. The bully's bullying, he's an 8th house, scorpionic side of things, and the victim would be the Virgo 6th house side of things, right? The dominatrix and the submissive, you know, where they get off on the sexuality, you know, like the woman with the whip and the leather, and then the man with like walking around on like a dog with chains and stuff like that. That's an 8th house, 6th house. Obviously, the 8th house is the dominant side of things. The 6th house would the Virgo dog, right? I mean, the 6th house Virgo, these relate to animals anyway. So it's like funny that the, you know, like the dominatrix has the whip, they're standing up there, usually a woman, and then the man plays the submissive 6th house role, and he's like the dog, right? The 6th house dog. Yeah. So a champion and challenger. I've made this analogy before, right? The heavyweight champion would be the 8th house position. The challenger would be the 6th house Virgo position, right? They're the challenger or the contender, right? Like we have you know, Mike Tyson and with the what's that young punk. Yeah, Mike Tyson's obviously the champ, the 8th house, and then the other guy, I can't even remember his name. Yeah, the young guy who's challenging Mike Tyson. I mean, that's a joke. I think everyone's hoping that, you know, Mike Tyson knocks this young punk's block off. But anyway. Doctor patient is another one. And it doesn't have to be this way, but it often is, right? Like there can be other sort of archetypes that this fulfills, but doctor patient, right? Doctor being the dominant 8th house position, and the patient being the 6th house submissive side of things, right? Also that fulfills like the 6th house health orientation. It could be vice versa, because if you're paying the doctor, then you could be in the dominant position, right? So not all of these are like hard firm, but it does indicate that dynamic as well. Lawyer client, same thing, right? And depending on which way it's going, it could be either one. You have a very rich client, then the lawyer might be the 6th house submissive side of it because they're in service to. But if it's the very powerful lawyer and a weak client, it's in reverse. Teacher student is another inconjunct situation where the teacher is the dominant role, the student would be the 6th house position. Counselor or therapist and their client, right? The counselor or therapist is going to be the 8th house. Their client will be the 6th house, right? And again, with the money, with their paying, like it can reverse depending on how the dynamic of the situation, right? If somebody's paying a counselor or therapist, and obviously if they have the means to be in a dominant position in control of the situation, they might be the eighth house, and the counselor or therapist might be the sixth house, right? Because they're in service to, right? Generally speaking, older or younger, like the older person is going to be more dominant, the younger person is going to be more submissive. That can be in reverse depending on the strength of the individuals, but generally speaking, government officials and the citizens or subjects, right? The government is obviously almost always in the dominant position, and the citizen or the subject of the government is going to be in the weaker, more submissive, service-oriented position, sixth house Virgo, right? Anytime you have a stronger position and a weaker position, that's sixth, eighth dynamic, right? Or like a patron and a server, right? The patron, most of the time being the one spending the money, will be in the dominant position. The one serving them, right? Like a waiter or waitress will be in the sixth house position if you're going out to dinner. So those sort of things. And you can probably come up with many more examples of this, but it's not equal relationships. It's not, will you marry me? Or let's do business, right? Those are Libra and seventh house relationships. These are unequal relationships. That's what we're talking about in the inconjunct. And we can see this dynamic play out in inconjuncts in the chart where one side will be dominant over the other. And that's what we're going to look at. All right, folks. Not that it matters, but just trying to focus my camera. Let me share the screen. We got 32 charts to go through. So I want to get through them. And I'm going to do my best to delineate the inconjuncts in each one of these charts to demonstrate what it means to have inconjunct in your chart. All right. The first one is Napoleon Bonaparte. And he's got Sun conjunct Ceres, but it's inconjunct Chiron. And this is applying because the sun's going to move faster than Chiron, so it's pretty soon going to be exact. And that's important. Applying aspects are going to be much more significant than separating aspects. Just in general, all aspects will have that quality, right? So we could see that Sun is in dignity and domicile in the 10th house, right? So that's his ego, that's his pride, that's his ambition, very 10th house public, spotlight, center of spotlight, Leo, right? But it's inconjunct Chiron, and that's making it a bit weird. And then, so what you want to do whenever you have an inconjunct is you want to see which one's in the dominant position, which one's in the submissive or sixth house position. So we see that Chiron is actually in the eighth position, and Virgo, Sun in Leo is more in this is in the sixth house position. The easy way to tell that is just like look at the opposite and then whichever sign. So like Sun from the Sun opposite is Aquarius, then one up is Chiron, so that's eighth. Because Aquarius would be the seventh house position. Chiron's in the eighth from the Sun. The Sun is in the sixth from Chiron because look at the opposite from Chiron. We get Virgo. Sun is one behind it in Leo, sixth, right? Seventh, sixth, seventh, eighth from Chiron. From the Sun, we get sixth, seventh, eighth, right? So Chiron's in the stronger position to his Sun. So what do we know about Napoleon? Well, he's kind of weird, right? Kind of strange man. Probably had a lot of complexes, and he was short. And so one of the things you could say is that his Sun, his dignified Sun, was in service to this very strange fifth house Chiron in Pisces. Chiron's always strange, right? Here it's retrograde even. If I wanted to dig farther, I could see when is Chiron going to change? Not in his life, unless he lived past 106. I don't think so. So yeah, it's always going to be retrograde. So there's always going to be, he feels weird, right? He feels weird. He feels like a reject. He feels like an outcast. And that's dominating his personality. It's dominating his Sun, right? So that's a very prominent quality for Napoleon, this Chiron in Pisces retrograde. It's going to dominate his Sun and his ambitions for success, career success, public recognition, fulfilling his ego and his pride. He's in service to this Chiron, which is like, oh, I feel like a weird outcast and people reject me. So it's very complex. It's very complex oriented, right? He has a complex. He has an inferiority complex because of this Chiron, I would say, right? And it would probably take him a long time to overcome that or to sort of make peace with that. But yeah, he's trying to resolve this Chiron with the sun. The sun's in service to this Chiron, right? Feeling like an outcast, feeling like a reject, feeling wounded. So yeah, that's how I would interpret that. Okay, let's go on to the second. And we have Prince, the musician, and Prince has actually a number of inconjuncts. So let's try and get through this. Okay, so that's here we have this one is about Moon and part of fortune. I'm not going to look at that because part of fortune is not really it's not really an aspect oriented. I mean, you could probably make some sense out of it, but it's a little vague. It's a little hard to really look at. But we can see the sun and ascendant here. So the sun is in a dominant position to the Scorpio rising, which itself is dominant, right? Scorpio has a very dominant nature, but it's Gemini. Gemini is eighth from the eighth. It's dominating the sun. But so this sun is really ruling over his ascendant. So he is very sun oriented, right? Sun in Gemini. Very talented musician, right? And ego, pride, fame, being noticed for his talents and his skills. Obviously, he was famous, right? So that's one thing. I mean, that's a little harder to see because ascendant and sun are so easily confused anyway, because they're both major aspects in the person's chart. But this is embodying this inconjunct really, and it deep into his personal nature, this dominant, very dominant personality, you could say. It's not an eighth house, obviously, is not without its difficulties and challenges. I don't mean to say that, right? It is. Eighth house has a lot, comes with a hefty price. But we can also look at this inconjunct, which is actually part of a yod. And so this would be the really significant one, where Pluto is inconjunct Mars, right? And so we could, I mean, it's out of sign even, but let's say like, okay, let's imagine that Pluto was at 0 degrees Virgo. Then Mars is in the dominant position. Mars is in dignity in the fifth house. So something about fifth house entertainment in Aries, initiating entertainment. Mars, he was a very physical and sexual kind of artist, right? Sexuality kind of oozed out of him. And of course, that's evident with this Pluto conjunct the MC. But let's see. So this Mars is his ascendant lord. It's in the fifth house, and it's the sixth cusp, sixth whole sign house, right? In the fifth, right? So something about fifth, sixth is overriding. So his artistry, we could say, this is his ascendant lord and fifth, sixth. So his writing, his artistry, his identity as an entertainer, Mars and Aries at 0 degrees, is dominant over his career and sexuality, right? This kind of overt Pluto conjunct the MC is dominated. He's dominating it, but at the same time, there's another inconjunct from the North Node and Neptune in Scorpio, which is in the 12th quadrant, but first whole sign house. Interesting. But it does show a lot of creativity, especially because Neptune in Scorpio. So that somehow that his artistry, his deep creative artistry, because Neptune, 12th house, is dominating even his body, his physicality, right? So, but it's also in support of the Pluto conjunct the MC because it's sextile, and that's the nature of the yod. It's a very complex combination where it's very interesting power dynamics are at play, where the most subservient part of it is also being supported by the most dominant part of the yod, with the point in between having, you know, both sides. So I mean, I know it sounds complicated, but we could say that all of these are sort of working together to create this very powerful, interesting dynamic of sex, sexuality, physicality, entertainment, art, and creativity, with the most dominant thing being his North Node conjunct Neptune in the 12th first whole sign house in Scorpio. So something very deep and sexual and creative and you know, psychological, right? But it's still in harmony with this Pluto conjunct the MC, and then the tension is focused on this ascendant Lord Mars in the 5th house. So it's really interesting, right? And Prince was a very interesting character. But let's keep going. I chose the Sibley chart for because I found it interesting. We can look at the inconjunct here and relate it to the American struggle, one of the American struggles that we know about, and that is that the South Node is inconjunct Jupiter, right? And this is also applying because the South Node moves backwards and Jupiter moves forward. Jupiter is going to go higher in number, where South Node is going to go lower in number, and they're going to meet, right? So it's applying aspect. Jupiter in Cancer. Jupiter is the ascendant lord, it's exalted in the 8th whole sign house, but 7th quadrant, conjunct Venus, right? And so this has to do with America's past, Aquarius, South Node in Aquarius in the 2nd house. So the values, resources, assets as it relates to civilization, society, groups, networks, communities. So this has to do with it's the original orientation of the United States, especially in regards to its treatment of Black people, right? Because and Native Americans, you could say as well, and Chinese, right, and Japanese, basically everyone. It's sort of like this kind of notion that, and it's not unusual, and I'm not like one of these woke idiots, right? Like racism was rampant everywhere in the world, and it still is in many ways. You know, so it's not an America problem. It's just that it is a problem that America has to deal with, whereas other nations don't have to deal with it as much, right? And that's simply it. And I'm not saying that, you know, America is worse than any other nation or better than any other nation. In many regards, it is more involved than many nations. There's slaves happening right now in Libya, right? Black slaves, like the Islamist, Arabic Islamists in Libya are capturing African slaves, African people who are on their way to try and make a better life for themselves up north. They're capturing them, making them slaves, right? So you know, and that's just one example, right? You know, in China, they enslave and murder the Uyghur Muslims, right? And there's so many different examples of that. That's not the point of this. I'm trying to, you know, people tend to think like America is like the great home of racism and all this. It's bullshit. It's nonsense. But we do have to deal with it, right? And so South Node, 2nd house, resources, assets, civilization, society, right? Community. How we treated our resources in regards to Aquarian ideals of how we're going to set up our society, right? We had slaves. And it's not unique to America. We didn't invent slavery. We ended slavery, but it was part of things. But we do have to answer to it because Jupiter, the ascendant lord, is in Cancer, and it's in a it's in a submissive position. I'm sorry. It's submissive. So in a sense, because it's 6, right? So South Node to North Node, and then Jupiter's in the 6 from the South Node. So in a sense, like the identity, the physical identity of America, Jupiter in Cancer, even though it's in really good dignity, is subservient to its past, and it has to make up for its past, right? So that's the point of what I'm saying. In a Jupiter in Cancer kind of way, it's sort of like Jupiter in Cancer is very loving, very giving, very generous, very caring for the minorities. And if you ask me, we take it to the extreme, especially with Joe Biden letting everyone fucking into the country from the border, like wide open borders. All the drugs are coming in, trafficking, all that. It's horrible. but that's the tendency of that we have to live through with America, where we have to sort of always answer to our past, right? Always giving for our past, trying to make up for our past, because Jupiter is in conjunct South Node in Aquarius in the second quadrant. So let's keep going. Pamela Anderson is the next chart. Okay. And Pamela Anderson has one simple in conjunct with Neptune. Neptune is Scorpio retrograde in the sixth house, in conjunct the ascendant. And this has to do with Baywatch, right? Particularly. There might be other manifestations, especially in regards to her activism. I think she's vegan and cares a lot about animals. These are very sixth house things as well, right? But Neptune, especially for women, creates a very exotic look when it's in aspect to the ascendant. Beautiful, exotic, sexy, right? And so this Neptune in Scorpio, which is very sexy, very exotic, is in service to her as a whole, right? And this also points to her time in Baywatch because of the regularity of the show. It's a TV show. Sixth House, it represents the regular sort of like magazines, TV shows, like for people in who are on the screen or in movies or in media, right? Like so, like anything periodic would be a sixth house thing because of the mundaneness of the regularity. So her being like this sexy lifeguard, right? It perfectly matches Neptune in Scorpio in the sixth house on Baywatch, right? And yeah, so that this Neptune is in service to her ascendant. It is an asset. It is a the dominant thing being her, Pamela Anderson. So it's sort of like, did Baywatch make Pamela Anderson, or did Pamela Anderson make Baywatch? She's dominant, right? So yeah, I think more like Pamela Anderson made Baywatch. Maybe not the only thing, but yeah, definitely huge asset for that show because of this. And I wonder, just out of curiosity, when did Neptune go direct? When she was 33. So I don't know what happened, but secondary progressed Neptune went direct when she was 33. Something big break probably happened at that time. Maybe that's when she got into Baywatch, but I'm not sure about that. Let's keep going. Giorgio Armani. Armani. All right. So sometimes people like to bemoan Neptune in the second house, but I've noticed Neptune in the second house can make person very rich, right? I have it. I'm still not rich, but I'm not giving up hope yet. So keep your fingers crossed for me that I'll be super rich like Armani. And others with Neptune in the second. But all right. So Neptune and Virgo in the second, strong exact in conjunct the North Node, with the North Node being in sixth from Neptune, Neptune being eighth from the North Node, right? Neptune and Virgo in the second house very much describes this creative design aesthetic, right? Because Neptune is very creative. Virgo is very perfection oriented. Second house deals with aesthetics and looks, right? So for a designer, this is excellent. And it being in conjunct the North Node in Aquarius shows that it's in a dominant position, so that his sort of North Node destiny, business, seventh house, right? Aquarius, very progressive, I guess you could say, or community, friends, networking. But anyway, that Neptune is dominating his sort of destiny. Is Neptune in Virgo in the second. So it's all about design. His destiny is all about Neptune in Virgo in the second house. Very creative, perfectionist design aesthetic, right? All the adornments, right? So that's all very second house themes. Pretty simple, straightforward there. And I have 32 charts to really kind of drive this home, to really demonstrate, because nobody else is, everyone else, when they talk about inconjuncts, they just say, oh, it's an inversion, the planets don't relate, that's it. It's way more than that, way more than that. They do relate. They just relate in an interesting way. So here we have Billie Joe Armstrong, who is the lead singer of Green Day. And so what do we got here? So we got Neptune, Mars, and this is also applying because Mars moving faster than Neptune. It's going to catch up to Neptune very shortly. Mars in Taurus. Um, let's see, Mars ruling the fourth and the 11th. So the 11th house for Billy Joe Armstrong, I'm seeing as band, right? The band Green Day, because groups, networks, friends, right? Neptune Inconjunct. So Neptune's in the dominant position of this Mars. Mars in the fourth, but fifth whole sign house. So we could say like creativity, arts, but also like early youth at home, sort of when he's young, right? And he did Green Day became popular when he was young. So that, I mean, that fits, right? Um, but this Neptune is dominating it, and it's in the 11th quadrant, 12th whole sign house. So it's very creative, but it also relates to his band. Um, so what's his band name? Green Day. Do you know what Green Day is? Green Day is a day without weed for a pothead is a Green Day. So you can see this Neptune in Sag, which is all about like partying and drugs and celebrations and expansion, is dominating his this very physical Mars and Taurus in the fourth, fifth house, right? Okay, so not fourth, not fifth quadrant, but fifth whole sign house. So that's still pulling in some that creative element, right? It's the Neptune is dominating the 11th Lord as well, which is the band. So this parting, he named his band Green Day. So that's it. That's what I'm trying to say, right? That this Neptune, this creative Neptune, which also relates to drugs and alcohol and partying celebrations, Sagittarius, right, is dominant over other factors, including his band and his, the physicality of the creative, playing guitar is a very like Martian mercurial kind of quality uh, thing. Singing Venus also, but anyway, Venus and Mars are mutual reception, so that plays in anyway. So yeah, Green Day. That's that. Okay. Now we got another Armstrong, but Louis Armstrong. Okay, Louis has a very powerful yod, they call it. And people say, oh, it's mystical, it's a finger of God. I just look at it very in my very Taurian way, Taurus, Mercury, Taurus, Jupiter, South Node. Yeah, it's very grounded. Like, so I look at two inconjuncts and a sextile. Um, I don't get all mystical and woo-woo with it. But anyway, we can see that the North Node is in conjunct the ascendant to the degree. And the North Node is in Scorpio, ascendant's in Aries, North Node is dominant, right? So it's dominating over his ascendant. We could also bring the moon in there, which is the fourth Lord, because it's applying, it's coming up to that degree, 5 degrees. Moon moves rather quickly, and it's a very relevant planet for everything, right? But it's ruling the fourth, and he was adopted, right? So that's a part of things that his destiny is sort of superior or dominating over his youth, which is true because he had a rough upbringing, he had a difficult upbringing. He was adopted, right? And then that in itself is a struggle, but he became famous, powerfully so. But it's not just North Node and Scorpio in the eighth house, which could tend to bring in a lot of crisis as well. Crisis before very powerful sort of destiny, right? But we see that Pluto in Gemini is in conjunct the North Node at the same exact degree of 18 degrees, and it's in the third house. So that signifies skills of the hands, and Pluto also, being the co-ruler of Scorpio, tying into that, dignifying this North Node, but dominating it as well. And being that his destiny is dominated by this third house, Pluto and Gemini, which very much relates to his trumpet playing and communication, singing. Well, the singing we could tie that to South Node, Taurus, right? But definitely the trumpet playing and his expressive ability. Also, we could see the North Node conjunct the ascendant for that as well, relating to his big, bright, moony face and the expressions that he could evoke with his face, and like how his face was just kind of blew up like a moon, especially when he played trumpet. And the harmony between the sextile of Pluto and Gemini, sextile the ascendant, that's an asset. It's very supportive. It's not in bad aspect. There's a square to Vesta, but that's kind of minor because Vesta's an asteroid. It's not a major thing. But yeah, so this Pluto is in pretty good aspect. I mean, there's some, I would say there's some challenges, and I think he did face some challenges in his life. Inconjunct is not completely smooth or easy or peaceful, but it can produce results, especially with the dominant submissive side. You see how that plays out, right? So yeah, this very much points to his destiny, and that it was all about the trumpet playing, the very powerful, obsessive skills of the third house Gemini. Bernard Arnault, I think he just became the richest man in the world again. Also Neptune in the second quadrant, third whole sign, but second quadrant, right? But we see Neptune. We see another yacht here, right? With Pluto, Sun, Neptune. So, all right, we'll start with Pluto. I'm going to ignore Ceres, but Pluto and Leo, dignified by the Sun through the inconjunct exact degree. Pluto in the 12th. Yeah, first whole sign house, but definitely 12th quadrant. So that's going to be very obsessive and creative, right? Powerfully so, right? Sort of obsessed with creativity. Pluto and Leo, and pulling in that 12th house. It's still influencing the first, the ascendant, because the same sign, right? But it's mixed, 12th first house influence, right? But it's being dominated by the Sun. Sun ruling that house. In fact, the ascendant, it's the ascendant lord, the 12th, right? So the obsession is in service. This creative obsession is in service to him, because it's his Sun and ascendant lord. So his ego, his pride, his identity, his body, his physicality, which is very motivated as well because of Mars here in Pisces, creatively motivated. Also fueled by an exalted Venus, right? Co-present. Which in turn is dominated by this second house Neptune. And we saw this with Armani. Similar thing, Neptune in the second, in Libra this time, but the very creative Neptune dealing with aesthetics. Bernard Arnault is a fashion, he's a mogul. All right, a French billionaire, business magnate, and art collector. Arnault's the chairman and chief executive of LVMH, Moet Hennessy, Louis Vuitton, blah, blah, blah. World's largest luxury goods company, right? But we see this Neptune in the second house in Libra. It's retrograde. Did Neptune ever go direct and progress? No, 110 days. So the retrograde does not spoil his wealth, right? I have Neptune retrograde in the second. Maybe I should be a fashion designer. I don't know. But anyway, it doesn't prohibit wealth creation, right? It's Neptune, and that signifies loss. If you hear people talk about Neptune in the second, they're like, oh, we should learn from Neptune in the second because they're going to give away all their money and all that, blah, blah, blah. And they'll probably be poor for all their life. No, the richest guy in the world has Neptune in the second, right? Also South Node. And there's a lot of, the second quadrant, even though the second lord is actually Mercury, but a lot of the second quadrant is taken up by Venus. Venus is exalted. But yeah, this Neptune is dominating the Sun, which is his identity. So he's being dominated by this design quality, this creative design element of the second house aesthetics, resources as well, probably, but that's also in harmony with this Pluto, this very obsessively creative Pluto. So this is a very creative combination with him caught in the middle. This is very much him because It's his ascendant lord, and it's his son, and it's the seventh house. So business is signified here, as well as partnership. Marriage is probably very important to him, but businesses as well. The handshakes, the deals, all in service to the creativity, and the creativity is in service to that as well. So it's a weird, yeah, it's a yod. Let's keep going. Cardi B. Bacardi B. Her name, she's named after Bacardi rum, which is a horrible thing to name yourself after. It's like terrible. It's so destructive, but whatever. That's what she chose to name herself after. She kind of shows her priorities. But here we have Moon inconjunct Venus. Moon's ruling the fourth house. And yeah, it's her home, it's her heart, it's her expressiveness. This is great for sort of being very expressive, heart on the sleeve, right? Showing up right in the face, Moon. Dispositing this Mars, but we see that this Venus is dominating the Moon. Venus ruling the seventh house, particularly second house. So resources, relationships in the eighth house of power, but potential criminality. And we know about her past. She would lure men into their bedroom and steal their money. Second house, seventh house, right? Venus, Scorpio. Venus is indulgence. It's not, Venus can be high-minded and, loving, but like when it's overtaking the moon, dominating the moon, which is the fourth house, it's like she doesn't feel good about robbing people or being, like a, Venus conjunct Pluto. Pluto's playing in here. But it's like an obsession of hers. And it may have different incarnations, but it's very dominant in relationships and resources, assets. It's like taking other people's money that she's, and she might feel like crap about it, but she's still going to do it because Venus is dominating her moon, right? And she's like, no, I feel like an asshole for stealing money but I had to do it, but I'm still an asshole for it, right? But I'm still going to do it because Venus and Pluto are dominating her moon, right? So not a very nice position, like because her heart is getting trampled over by her this kind of superficial, obsessive, sexual, physical desires, right? So yeah. David Bowie. All righty. I don't have all these memorized. I did look at all of them, but it's like each time I have to understand it just on the fly, which is good practice, really. So we see this one, this inconjunct. It's not exact, but it is applying because both Mars and Sun will catch up to Uranus and hit it exact. But let's see here. Sun ruling the seventh. In the 12th, clearly in the 12th, Mars ruling 10th whole sign house. Not a cusp here, but third. So career, writing, music, skills of the hands. So this is a very creative aspect that is dominating this Uranus, which is fifth whole sign house, but fourth, right? So sort of his uniqueness. We see this when he is being very eclectic, starman, androgynous alien, right? That's the very Uranian kind of fourth, fifth house quality, as well as being extremely dynamic performer, right? In Gemini. But that his Sun and his Mars, so his public image, relationships, business, creativity, 12th house, and skills of the hands, intellect, writing, all these are taking precedence over this kind of Uranian quality. In some senses, they're tied together because Gemini and third house Mars, right? but somehow that this this quality of being Uranian is being dominated by being um uh by his public image, by friends or siblings, right? By business and relationships. In other words, more mundane sort of things are overshadowing his uniqueness. And it's not to say that he wasn't unique, but he was the uniqueness was in service to something more common, which is Sun and Mars and Capricorn. And it's a very strong Mars being in Capricorn. And um, if Uranus was dominating his Sun and Mars, in other words, um, his main expression would be overtly Uranian. And it wasn't. It was the Uranus was in service to. He did not like to be too different, David Bowie. And when he came out as like bisexual or something, the gay community wanted him to sort of be a mascot for the whole LGBTQ cause. He didn't want to. And later he said, "Oh, I was just like a phase. I'm not really gay. I'm or bisexual or whatever. I don't know, like something to that effect." But he did not. He wanted to be. The Uranus was in service to himself as an artist, his Sun, his Mars, his all this significations, his relationships, right? These that the Uranian uniqueness was secondary because he was a radio star. He was an MTV star. He was pretty mundane. If he was very unique. Don't take offense. I'm not saying he wasn't, but he was not that out of the box. He tried to be in the box. He wanted to be in the box. He wanted to be acceptable by society, which is not necessarily Uranian, right? But he was Uranian, but it was just in service to something else, which is his Sun and Mars, right? If that makes sense. It was a secondary factor, the Uranian weirdness. It was in service to. Okay. Now we have Marlon Brando, and I got tripped up by this one before. We're not going to look at this one because it's Vesta, so it's not really, it's going to be very obscure, Pluto, Vesta. But this one, Mars, Neptune, which is exact. And this very much relates to his acting. And so, yeah, Mars and Capricorn the second is his voice, not his expression, his voice, his aesthetic, his outward appearance. Um, yeah, and it's so actors usually have very strong second houses, and he does here. But the Neptune relates to, especially in the ninth house, relates to acting, right? And he trained in acting, and that was always very important to him. Neptune's in Leo, ninth house, so ninth house dealing with studies, right? Learning in a higher capacity, and he studied acting, right? And also he was a mimic, right? So that this Neptune is dominating over this Mars, right? So the creative quality, the imagination, the Neptune is especially in Leo very much relates to acting, right? So this is all about sort of like this high level acting that was dominating his Mars and Capricorn in the second house. Mars ruling the fifth, so entertainment, dispositing, his sun, moon, Chiron, Mercury. So yeah, very important planet, as well as his Saturn and 12th house. So a lot of creativity here, right? Dominated by this Neptune. Quite simple, right? He amazing actor, like and well trained, right? Trained actor, mimic. Um, Mimic meaning that Neptune is dominating his voice, which Neptune is the mimic. Neptune is the can take on any shape, any form. It can be anything you want it to be, anything you imagine, especially in a planet in a sign like Leo. And then ninth house is like the high level training that he would have received for it. And when he was 24, it went direct, so that was probably a big turning point for him as far as his acting. So next we have Salvador Dali. Right. Like, there we go. All right, Dali. Amazing artist, Dali. Okay. Now I know there's one between. I don't think this is the one I wanted. I don't know why I chose this, in fact. Because here it's series, but series is very difficult to sort of delineate. There must be another one. Um, I'm not sure what I was going for with this. I think it's a mistake. Let's skip over this because series is too obscure to sort of make sense of. Um, well, let's just move on. James Dean. Okay. James Dean has Sun applying to Pluto inconjunct, as well as Mars Venus. So let's do one at a time. Sun Pluto applying, because Sun is faster. It's going to catch up to Pluto very shortly. Um, Sun is ruling the fifth house. Pluto's in the fourth house, uh, with Sun dominating over this Pluto. So something about his childhood, the abuse that he received in childhood, emotional abuse, maybe from the mother. Um, yeah. Uh, Obviously it wasn't all about Jupiter's here in Cancer exalted, but that his fame, his popularity, 11th house popularity, um, his this the entertainment that was dominating over it, right? It's in the eighth compared to Pluto in the sixth, right? So um somehow that the whatever emotional abuse or obsessiveness quality that he received at home from his parents, from his childhood, served or fueled his fame and his popularity, right? He used it to his advantage and really milked it for all it's worth, with this very rebellious Sun in Aquarius, of course, Uranus rising and North Node, rebel without a cause. I mean, they intuited that, they pulled that one, they called that one right. But so yeah, so the Sun, which is the fifth lord in the 11th, which is entertainment and popularity, friends, right? Wins out over his the childhood abuse. He used it to his advantage, made it more edgy, right? Raw, something like that. Um, and then we see Venus and Mars in conjunct, with Mars dominating over Venus. And he was bisexual, and we can see that by the this in conjunct with Mars and Venus, sort of imbalance between his masculine and feminine energies, right? With Mars being dominant, um, Venus being submissive, Venus conjunct the MC relationships, um, resources, assets. So, and then Mars ruling, that's his ascendant lord, Mars. So him and eighth house, sort of dispositing his moon. So like power, something very dangerous about him. It's very is dominating over his relationships, um, as well as his resources. Yeah. So and Mars, in a day chart, is the most malefic. So he was his own worst enemy, and he was, he liked very he preferred relationships where he could dominate them. Mars dominating Venus. Venus is the seventh lord. They were public. They were, he's getting involved with people, other public figures, other people in the movie business. But he himself was going to be in a dominant role with that, as well as his money, his assets, his resources. He's going to use that, um, or that's going to be in service to sort of him and his power trips, or dangerous. Mars can relate to cars as well, right? And so like we see um he's being overly dangerous. because Mars, eighth house, first house, Uranus, right? Like reckless, dangerous, over his, with others, with other people, with his resources, and also, yeah, relationships. So, yeah, that's James Dean. Now we have Leonardo DiCaprio. Okay, so here we have Pluto, Jupiter in conjunct. All right. I'm not going to talk about the South Node Mars one, but just this one. So Jupiter is in it's in domicile in Pisces, ruling the sixth house. So it's in very good dignity for sixth house topics, which could be writing, something regular. I don't know if he was ever in any series or show, but he could have fit in. But Pisces itself is more like movies, very like dramatic, right? Um, Sixth house, Jupiter is also, so Jupiter's ruling six and the third. So his expression, his writing, his skills of the hands, but his expression is in service to this very intense Pluto in the first. So him as this very intense plutonic kind of person. He also has Moon in the first. That's going to really help with this expression a lot. But so this makes him very intense, right? Pluto in the first, very powerful, very intense, and obsessed with relationships. Libra, right? And plus Venus is in Scorpio, right? So his daily work as well as his expression is going to be really in service to him as this very intense kind of person and his obsessive relationships. For him, relationships are more important. Like for him, being an actor is a means to get women. I mean, it's like, and make money, and look good, right? It's not really about it might be. I mean, he might put it differently, right? But there is something about this obsessive relationship orientation that Scorpio is also about relationships, just dominating relationships. So is Pluto and Libra. But yeah, the relationships are far more important to him than his acting, right? If he had to choose one, he'd probably take a handful of young girls over acting any day if he had to choose. I'm just saying, maybe, probably. Who knows? But I think that's probably, if he's probably being really honest, that's probably the case. Bob Dylan. Okay. So we get Saturn, Moon is separating, but it's still tied in there. Uranus to ascendant. Saturn being in the submissive sixth house position. All right. And so Saturn ruling the second house, second quadrant, second whole sign house, and third whole sign house. So his singing was in service to him as a person, so like people are like, Bob Dylan did not have a great voice. You hear that all the time, right? It didn't matter. His voice was secondary. Yeah, Saturn in Taurus. So yeah, it's not great dignity, but it's Taurus. Moon's in Taurus as well. Uranus, Jupiter. And Moon is an excellent dignity here. But because Saturn's ruling the second in the sixth, inconjunct the ascendant, it shows that he himself was in a dominant position over the second lord, his voice. And so yeah, it's all about Bob Dylan and his writing ability, sixth house, Gemini influence, right? So yeah, I mean that makes sense. Like it wasn't, Bob Dylan wasn't about his voice. It wasn't. It was about him. It was about him and his writing, and about him as a persona, as a figure. Next we have Clint Eastwood. So Clint Eastwood, Gemini Sun, right? Gemini Mercury. I'm a Gemini Sun. Do me and Clint Eastwood, are we really all that similar? Well, we should be. both Gemini suns, both Scorpio risings, right? But what makes Clint Eastwood? It's the Saturn in the second house in Capricorn. I also probably part of fortune exactly conjunct has something to do with it, but it's in conjunct the sun. And it's so the sun is actually in the sixth compared to Saturn. So Saturn's dominating his sun. So that's why when you see Clint Eastwood, this is a really great example. When you see Clint Eastwood, he's not just like this typical chatty butterfly, airy Gemini, right? You see this fucking Saturn in Capricorn, and you're just like, holy shit, right? You feel lucky, punk? Well, do you? Right? That's the Saturn in Capricorn second house dominating his sun, right? And it's applying. It's one, the sun's going to move faster than Saturn. It's going to, be at 10 degrees very shortly. And also he has his Mercury stationary in the seventh in Taurus. So the stationary Mercury is going to be very powerful for expression as well, right? But this Saturn, like he's so Saturn, like he doesn't come off as a Gemini. So if you have your sun sign being in conjunct another planet, that especially if it's in the eighth and your sun is in the sixth comparatively, that planet will dominate your sun sign, right? You'll probably see that planet more than your sun. So what we're seeing a lot with Clint Eastwood is the Saturn in Capricorn, in the second house. So like that voice, that authority, right? That's why he's so good. It's Saturn in Capricorn. It's retrograde. Let's see. I wonder if it's when it went. No, 100 days. So it's retrograde his whole life. So he's always been like, and that definitely suits Clint Eastwood, the sort of the retrograde attitude, the belligerence, get off my lawn, right? This sort of like just going against the grain, right? Being a rebel, being belligerent, not going along with things. That's why we love him. All right. Queen Lizard. No, Queen Elizabeth, Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth. Okay. Um, so here we have an applying in conjunct between Moon and Venus exalted in the second quadrant in Pisces, right? So her riches, right? Rich, 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 rich. Even if you wanted to look at a second whole sign house with Jupiter, we still see Jupiter here, like Jupiter. The both benefics, depending on which house system you use, are in the second house, right? Venus for night chart, it would be the her best planet, you could say, and it's exalted, right? So this greatly very strongly points to riches, right? Now Moon is subservience in the sixth to her Venus in Pisces, exalted Venus, by the inconjunct. Venus is some moons in Leo, so this very royal sort of persona, royal woman, right? Which she was the queen, in a very powerful position, seventh quadrant, eighth whole sign house, right? So very dominant itself, Venus, Moon, but her Moon, which is her seventh lord, so relationships, are dominated by Venus in Pisces, right? Venus ruling the fourth, so her home, her land, her wealth, her riches, her resources, as well as ninth. So her belief system, philosophy is tied to her wealth, right? But that her wealth is dominating even her relationships and her own heart, her own moon. We saw this with Cardi B, where Venus was dominating the moon. So it's like with Queen Elizabeth, the most important thing is her wealth, right? Like everything serves her wealth. Her partners, so this is, we can see Philip Mountbatten, right? Was subservient to her. Like that was, he came underneath her, right? And her wealth, her enormous wealth. It's all about her wealth, right? With Queen Elizabeth, like how much she controls, the castles and the land and the, billions and trillions of fortunes, right? Everything's dominating, even to her own satisfaction. It was more important. It was right because Moon is the heart, right? And so everything was being centered around that for her. we could further, talk about the moon, or sorry, Mars and Jupiter in conjunct the North Node, particularly Mars. Let's see. Um, Mars is in the dominant position. Mars third house. I haven't really thought about this, and I probably don't know enough about her life to make sense of that. But siblings or uh, resources, I don't know. Anyway, let's keep going. Jimi Hendrix. Okay, so here we see Ascendant Lord Jupiter in Cancer conjunct the Moon, which is this is such a great combination. Uh, Moon, Jupiter, and Cancer is really wonderful for artists. It creates like very powerful, music, artistry, creativity. Jupiter is expanding the hearts, and Cancer is very loving, generous, good-natured, right? Um, Beautiful. And then is Ascendant Lord, but it shows that he is embodying this Inconjunct because his Ascendant Lord is dominating his Ascendant, right? So it's like, and it's dispositing his Sun, Mercury, and Venus, right? And it's in the eighth whole sign house, seventh quadrant, eighth whole sign house. So it's a very powerful, not ultimately we're seeing elements of the eighth house, especially with the Pluto here, Pluto and Leo, right? But because we know how it ended, but very powerful, very dynamic, and he embodies the Inconjunct in himself. Jimi Hendrix, we could say, really personifies the Inconjunct with the intensity, the power of his music. It's a real force, right? And in a very good way because of Jupiter, Moon, right? Here. So powerful, powerful, powerful is really like one way you would describe his music. Um, so yeah, that's just like a within himself. He's um carrying this kind of inconjunct energy. It's not bad. Like we don't disparage Jimi Hendrix. We're not just like, he's okay. like like I make fun of myself. No, he's considered the greatest guitar player of all time with Descendant Lord Inconjunct the Ascendant. So I mean, come on, we have to apply real life situations to astrology. Otherwise, it's bullshit. You can't just like ignore the charts and just be like, well, the Inconjunct is two signs that have nothing to do with each other, therefore it's an inversion. Well, it doesn't mean anything. They can't relate. Fuck off. Jimi Hendrix had it in a very major combination, right? Right? His ascendant lord is Inconjunct his ascendant, and it makes him extremely fucking powerful because it's dominant, right? Anyway. Um, and we say Moon in conjunct the South Node. I haven't really thought about that, but Moon's in great dignity, but it's in service to the South Node. So I don't know. Second house. So something about that. Anyway. The main one was the Jupiter in conjunct the ascendant. Now we got Janis Joplin, another one, where we can see, okay, Moon applying to Mercury, even though Mercury moves fast, Moon moves faster. That's going to meet up with the exact inconjunct to Mercury very soon. And then similarly, we see the Moon, Jupiter in Cancer in the fifth house for Janis Joplin, right? We saw in the seventh, eighth house for Jimi Hendrix. Here we see it in the fifth house, sixth whole sign house, but fifth quadrant. So fifth, sixth. So, also having to do with writing or mundane daily work, daily activity, right? But fifth house, entertainment, arts, artistry. And then Moon domicile, conjunct Jupiter exalted, right? Not as tight as Jimi Hendrix, but still there. And then we see Mercury ruling the fourth and the eighth, right? Eighth cusp, eighth whole sign house. And so Moon is in the sixth position. Mercury is in the eighth position with Venus in the 12th in Aquarius. 12th quadrant, first whole sign house. So we're seeing elements of youth or home, as well as the 8th house, very powerful, dominating house itself, Mercury. In the 12th, dominating her moon, 5th house. Moon, Mercury is conjunct Venus. So this is a very creative combination because Mercury Venus combinations tend to be excellent for artistry because the expression is then beautified by Venus. And we're seeing pulling in, 3rd house elements as well. So a lot of expression, creative expression is coming through here. And it's dominating her moon. She was unhappy, right? Even though Moon and Jupiter in the 5th, you'd think, okay, she's going to be really happy. But Mercury, which is the 8th lord, and it pulling in a lot of expressive qualities and youthfulness, and her home. So something about her home, something about her upbringing, which was also tied to 8th. So something not very nice, not very good, not very wonderful about her youth, or her family or her parents, especially with Saturn here. It's not the most malefic planet. Mars would be public image, but yeah, this was dominating her own psychology, was dominating her 5th house entertainment, creativity. These are both creative, 5th house, 12th house. But we can see that because Mercury is ruling the 4th and the 8th, particularly, it's having to do with some difficulties in childhood that is influencing her own psychology, that was making her unhappy. It was overriding her Cancer moon. You'd think she'd be happy with Moon and Jupiter in Cancer in the 5th house, but she was not. Right? She was deeply troubled. Aquarius can also represent trauma, right? Uranus can also represent trauma in the 4th whole sign house with Saturn, her parents, her upbringing, something about that. And it's not great. Additionally, we see the inconjunct with the Sun and Chiron. And so Chiron is dominating over the Sun. That made her weird, right? In the same way that we saw Saturn dominating Clint Eastwood's Sun. So he's very Saturnian. And then like also Napoleon, we saw Chiron dominating his Sun. So she's coming from a very wounded, rejected, especially in relationship, motivation, right? Where her relationships are dominating her personality, her Sun, her ambition, her creative ambition, and that there's woundedness and rejection and weirdness and strangeness about her relationships that was just too dominant. So both her Sun and Moon were being sort of dominated by malefic influences, Chiron and 8th lord, 4th lord, in the 12th retrograde. And I wonder, let's just check to see when Mercury would have gone direct. When she was 17, so that probably didn't. I mean, when she was 17, she might have had a big break, but the retrograde is not. Well, it could be. It could be related to a difficult upbringing. Anyway. Next, we have Bruce Lee. So here we have the main one with main inconjunct with North Node and Saturn. Jupiter is applying to that inconjunct as well, right? But Saturn, 6th house, but actually Saturn's 6th from the ascendant, but 8th from the North Node. Now, is it a day chart or night chart? Well, if we take this exact, it's actually a night chart, right? But 7:12 a.m., difficult to say. But anyway, Saturn is a malefic, regardless of which one is whether we say it's a day chart or night chart. Saturn is a malefic. Saturn dominating his destiny, which is Saturn's ruling the 2nd and 3rd house, but it's in the 6th. And actually, he died by medical complications. He had a back injury, which the doctor gave him like a lot of these celebrities, they die by doctor, right? They have this problem, that problem, and the doctor gives them lots of different drugs, and then they die, right? That's what happened. It was a medical complication from all the drugs he was taking because he used, pain meds for a wounded back. He overdid it in his workouts. He was obsessed with his physicality. This uh Pluto squares Mars, or yeah, Pluto square Mars, Mars and Scorpio with Mars and Venus. So he's working out. He was obsessively working out. He worked out way too much, right? And he hurt himself. Saturn in the sixth, right? Saturn dealing with rigidity, right? Sixth house is health. That his destiny was overcome by this Saturn in the sixth, and it influencing his body, Jupiter, ascendant lord, right? As well. Yeah. The second house consumption, you could say. Third house, well, I don't know, neighborhood. I don't, maybe that's not related, but although you could relate it to fighting because sixth house, third house, hands, competition, right? So related in that way. But yeah, no, so like generally speaking, difficult destiny, North Node, inconjunct Saturn. Saturn's retrograde. I wonder when it went correct. So when he was 42, I don't even know when he died, but if maybe it was 42. I don't know. That'd be interesting to find out. John Lennon. All right. So here we see Moon Venus, with Venus ruling the seventh in Picky Virgo. And we know that he married a woman who I like to call, oh no, it's Yoko. Oh no, here comes Yoko. Yeah. Well, she's Venus in Virgo, so the astrology agrees, right? Also Sun in detriment, Mars, or Sun in debility, Mars in detriment. That's my term. Wherever they're both in poor dignity is the main point, and then the Lord is also in poor dignity. So that's why it's, oh no, it's Yoko, really. And oh no, it's Yoko is inconjunct his moon, which is his fourth Lord, so his home. So and Venus is dominant, right? So who ruled the home? Oh no, it's Yoko ruled his home. And so they would lay in bed and do heroin. That's, oh no, it's Yoko's fault. It's also John Lennon's fault, but oh no, it's Yoko. Ruled his heart, his home, his emotions. He had to, unfortunately, put her above his own satisfaction. That's just his nature, his destiny. So yeah. That's, oh no, it's Yoko and John Lennon. Barack Obama. Some of these are fun. All right. Okay, here we see we have two this one's a separating yod, so that's not as significant because Venus is going to move away from Jupiter, but here we have an exact between Saturn and Uranus North Node. Okay. Saturn is his ascendant lord and the 12th lord in the 12th house. It's in good dignity, it's in Capricorn. And so Uranus is actually in the dominant position over Saturn, which the ascendant lord, the 12th lord. So North Node Uranus is very political for him because it's the seventh house, it's business, it's Leo, it's Uranus. So he was a politician. Obviously, he's still a politician. His ideology, which is his political ideology, which is Uranus rules the political sort of genre, right? Because it's very social oriented, big minded. And so we often see this with politicians, a very strong, prominent Uranus. So that his political ideology is dominant over himself, his sort of, his subconscious 12th mind, right? Radical, this radical um, political ideology. He's a socialist. For those of you who don't realize it, he's masquerading as, a nice Democrat, but he's really a socialist. And so that's his political ideology, which is also reinforced by North Node, is dramatically overtaking him. So he's becoming, his whole identity is Uranus, North Node Uranus, seventh house, working with others to forward his political ideology, right? It's very, you know, it's very accurate for Barack Obama. He's, his main thing is this radical political socialism that he's for, maybe even Marxism or communism, right? That's literally what's going on here. If we wanted to look at this one, this is a much lighter one, but let's see what happens. I'm not even sure. So second lord, 11th lord. So resources, talking about resources, community, also political ideology, because Aquarius, Jupiter, right? And then Venus is subservient to that again. Venus ruling the fourth. So yeah, his homeland, his home, his upbringing, in the fifth house. So entertainment, performance, things of that nature, children, even his studies, all in service to this political ideology, because Aquarius, Jupiter, belief system, right? In his subconscious. So he's purely this political ideological type person, even South Node in Aquarius, Ascendant in Aquarius, right? He's all about socialism, Marxism, communism. It's Barack Obama. Dolly Parton. All right. So here we have North Node, Sun, Venus applying, but mostly Sun, North Node. Anything else? I think there was another one that I was looking at. I guess you could say Moon to Sun as well. But let's look at the North Node to Sun. So North Node in Gemini in the 10th house would have to deal with her guitar playing, her writing, her expression, right? Her, Uranus, rhythm, especially in Gemini. Somebody said Moon is rhythm. Moon is not rhythm. Moon's mood. Okay, Moon is emotions. Moon is moodiness. Yes, Moon has rhythms, but they're very slow and long. Uranus is all about bow, bow, bow. Like, it's the drum beat, right? So, yeah, that's wrong. Anyway, rhythm, guitar playing, all that, public, being famous and all that. But it's in service to her Sun, which is Sun is ruling the 12th house in the 5th house. So this is a very creative Sun, right? Dispositing Pluto, 12th creativity, Moon's in the 12th or 12th first. But this is Sun is at anaretic degree of Capricorn, is conjunct Venus in the 5th house. So this is all about her creativity. So she's all about her music, right? Much more than being famous. If she had to choose one, Dolly Parton, or fame or music, it would be music. It would be entertainment. It would be creativity. I mean, this is also reinforced by North Node in Gemini, which is also very, skills of the hands, but that it's in service to this 5th house, yeah, Capricorn, so leadership, but yeah, dispositing the 12th house as well, or ruling over the 12th house. Then we could say the moon is dominating over her sun, because by 1 degree, yeah, it's in the same sign, trinally, signally, earth signs, but at the 0 degree and anaretic degree, more degree, sun moves into Aquarius, and so it's a separating aspect. so it's not as strong, but still moon is dominating over the sun. Um, moon ruling 11th house in the 12th. So career success or band group network in the 12th. So also creativity. So in a sense, the moon, her femininity, 12th house, first house, first whole sign house, dominating over her sun. And it's a night chart, so her moon is stronger anyway. So that works quite well, right? Makes her a very powerful woman. River Phoenix. Um, River Phoenix has some similarities to me. I'm still alive though, and he's not. That's the difference. Also, he was really famous, and I'm not. But yeah, so he died young of drugs. Um, but he was a famous actor for a little while. And so let's see what's going on here. So we get a Jupiter moon in conjunct, and that is applying because moon will quickly move into Gemini and be exactly in conjunct Jupiter, right? So let's see, Jupiter is ruling the 5th house and the 2nd house. So that deals with acting, right? Voice, entertainment, right? Jupiter's in Scorpio, in the first whole sign house, close enough to the ascendant, pretty much conjunct the ascendant. Moon ruling the 9th house. So 9th house, among other things, celebrations, right? 9th house is a very celebratory planet, uh, planet, house. Um, Jupiter is too, but so Moon in Taurus, very indulgent. Um, and yeah, it's in the 7th house, but it's almost in the 8th whole sign house, right? But anyway, that this 9th house celebration at the anaretic degree of Taurus is overcoming or dominating this Jupiter, which deals with his creativity, his acting, his speaking, his luck, his fortune, right? Jupiter is the most benefic planet in the chart, but it's in Scorpio and dominated by this moon, which is overly indulgent, right? Especially with well, it does have Saturn here. So Saturn is going to cause issues, problems, delays, restrictions, but it's also opposite Neptune. So it's carrying this Neptune in Scorpio influence, which is drugs. And then so it's just like overly indulgent, but it's at the same time restrictive. Um, yeah. But it's like his fortune was denied by this Moon Saturn conjunction, Neptune being involved. Yeah, something like that. Also 2nd house dealing with consumption. But he died of drugs. So it's just like too much partying, celebrations, but the Saturn did not make it. Saturn restricted it as well, right? But then the Neptune is weird combination. Weird combination of things. Pablo Picasso. Okay. So Pablo Picasso has a very intense inconjunct here with Moon, North Node, and then Saturn. Vesta, you could say, but we'll just ignore the Vesta. Saturn ruling the 6th and 7th house. And it is in service to the moon and the North Node in the 5th house. Moon ruling the 12th house. So 12th and the 5th is highly creative in Sagittarius. Right? So his art was dominant over this, over his relationships, over his daily work, right? And that the creative nature of the moon in Sag, 5th house, was overcoming his structural sensitivities, his structural um Saturn rules order and structure. So it's like the moon, his paintings, his art, his passion was very much more moon oriented than Saturnian. right? And because he wasn't a Saturnian artist, he wasn't following the rules, he wasn't bound by the rules. He was breaking all the rules. He was making all the rules. He was redefining all the rules through his very creative moon and Sag in the fifth house, ruling the 12th house, North Node, and conjunct the North Node, right? Right. Moon overcoming Saturn, moon dominating Saturn, right? His paintings were very moonish, not Saturnian structurally. That was part that made him a great success. Elvis, what are we looking at here? Okay. Saturn to Pluto. All right. Saturn ruling the second and third house. So Saturn having everything to do with his expression, dominating over his Pluto series, where this Pluto, eighth house Pluto, was in service to Saturn, but at the same time, Pluto's in the eighth house. So what's really interesting is that Elvis was very anti-drugs and alcohol, but for some reason he made an exception when it came to the doctors prescribing pain meds, which after he got divorced from Priscilla, he really went downhill and became fat and addicted to prescription drugs and meds. So we can see that this eighth house, powerful eighth house Pluto, was subservient to the Saturn, the doctor, right? The authority figure. Also, he went to war. He was drafted. So Saturn dominating over his own powerful psychology over others, right? Saturn, Pluto in Pluto in the eighth can really be a very dominant position. It can really manipulate other people, have psychological understanding of others. But here, it's subservient to Saturn, authority, rulership, leadership, right? So the draft, Aquarius being very, socially oriented, right? So that adds up. And the doctors, right? He wouldn't do illegal drugs and criticized other people who did do drugs, right? He was critical of the Beatles who did the drugs, yet most of them outlived him. Well, not all of them, but some of them. But yeah, this Saturn in, this domicile Saturn in Aquarius in the third house, which rules the intellect, overpowering um, his own power, right? He was subservient to Saturn. Saturn dominated him. His doctor, the government, right? He was a willing participant. He went to war willingly, unlike Muhammad Ali. All right, here we have Auguste Renoir, another painter. And here we can see Chiron, Inconjunct the ascendant and Neptune. But it's in the sixth Inconjunct, sixth subservient position. So that Renoir was weird. He was strange. He was an odd fellow. He was. His paintings, a lot of them are very beautiful, wonderful. I'm not discounting his talent, but especially towards the end of his life, he started painting these fat pink nudes that were very strange, right? These like cherubs of whatever, just like fat pink ladies, and everyone's like, "What are you doing that for? That's weird," right? But it had to do with this Chiron not being dominant, but serving his himself and his artistry, Neptune, right? In Aquarius, Aquarius is weird in its own right, right? But yeah, that it wasn't dominating it. It was in service. It was an underlying quality that yes, he himself was Renoir, very creative, Aquarian, all that, Piscean, tons of Pisces, right? Beautiful, talented, all that. Mars and Scorpio, but in a supportive role was this Chiron in Cancer, this weirdness, this strangeness. Cancer, we can see that with the pink ladies, the feminine aspect. It's retrograde. It's fifth quadrant, right? But sixth whole sign house. And the inconjunct is very much a sixth position. So service, the weirdness, the chironic weirdness was subservient to him and his heart. Go to Steven Spielberg. All right. And here we have Uranus, Venus, with also Jupiter applying to that inconjunct. And Uranus is in the dominant position, along with North Node, 12th house, Gemini. Venus ruling 5th house, so entertainment, arts, performance, that sort of thing, as well as it's the 11th whole sign house, right? So groups, networks, career success, friends, communities. So, and then Jupiter, if we wanted to take it further, we could say, okay, sixth house, the mundane daily work, writing, stuff like that. Jupiter is also the MC Lord, right? That the dominant quality of Spielberg is this North Node Uranus in Gemini in the 12th house. This exotic Uranian out there kind of thing that makes him so unique and his movies so unique, right? E.T. riding a bike into space, right? With the little boy riding E.T. I don't remember all of Steven Spielberg's movies, but like that alone, right? Like E.T. in the 12th house in Gemini, short distance travel, bike, right? It's like that was like the sort of thing that's like, wow, okay. There's a lot of stuff going on. A lot of it's mundane, ordinary, just regular, good old filmmaking. But what really makes Steven Spielberg powerful and dynamic is this North Node Uranus in the 12th. It's like, yeah, riding with your alien in a bike into outer space. It's like weirdness, right? Gemini, Uranus, it's creative, it's brilliant, it's intellectual, it's expressive, it's exotic, it's foreign, it's trailblazing, groundbreaking, right? Progressive, all the things that you want to. It kind of blows you away, right? And so that's dominating his fifth house, scorpionic, creative stuff. Normal creativity. In the fifth house, we have like normal, everyday schoolyard creativity. In the 12th house, we have something very exotic, right? A very exotic, foreign creativity, especially with Uranus here, right? So I think that's pretty accurate for Spielberg. Yeah, so let's go to Meryl Streep. Okay. And she has this very prominent one with Jupiter and Sun and Uranus, right? Triple the Sun exact. So she's really unique because Sun is Cazimi Uranus in Cancer. So for a woman especially, that's going to be really powerful because of the Cancer. It just makes her stand out tremendously as an individual. Sun Cazimi Uranus, like extremely unique, extremely independent, right? But Jupiter is dominating. Uranus also co-ruling Aquarius, so somewhat dignifying this, but Jupiter also dignifying the Sun in Uranus because it's exalted in Cancer, right? Both 0 degrees, so the pure expression. Jupiter ruling 6th house and 9th house. So, her studying as an actress and her mundane, daily work in the 7th, 2 degrees from the descendant. So relationships, but also business, partnerships, just connecting with others in general. It's also actually part of a yod. It's not as the Saturn is not as strong, but in this combination, because it's actually Jupiter would be applying to this Yeah. So that does work. It does fit. Um, but Jupiter dominating her sun. Yeah, Jupiter is in the eighth, Sun is in the sixth, and Uranus. So she doesn't come across as somebody particularly Uranian, right? Because Jupiter, it's dominated by Jupiter. She comes across as somebody bigger than life. It's very large, generous, big, you know, magnanimous type person, right? Not somebody who's extremely unique, weird, quirky, scientific, or like techie, or political, or humorous, or anything like that. She's much more Jupiterian, even though she is very Uranian. It's a really interesting combination, right? Jupiter's dominating it. But then Saturn in the second, also dominating this Jupiter, right? Because it's Saturn in Virgo, second house. So this very authoritarian, perfect way of communicating, right? She's very proper, right? I mean, yeah, Pluto in the ascendant, Pluto in the first, square moon. I mean, that's a whole nother bag, but yeah, very, so yeah, coming across with a lot of authority, a lot of maturity, a lot of like this perfectionist quality, overcoming this Jupiter. So it's really tied in here. Very, very dynamic, you can say, between like the way she presents herself with Saturn in Virgo, with this Jupiter in the seventh, being very generous with others, coming across as like a teacher, um, guru or something like that, um, dominating her sun, right? And so we don't see this Uranus as much, but it's still very strong within her. And it's supported by the Saturn. I mean, yeah, Saturn and Cancer is that's not as good, but the Jupiter definitely dignifies the sun, and it's the ascendant lord, right? So it's really interesting. Makes her very, very dynamic. Elizabeth Taylor. All right. Now we see this is not like exact, but we see this moon is applying to and in conjunct with Uranus and Venus in the fourth quadrant, fifth whole sign house, right? Yeah, it's not exactly trying the ascendant, but it's pretty close, within 5 degrees. And so that adds to her beauty and her exoticness. Um, Venus is ruling the sixth cusp, sixth whole sign house, fifth lord, right? Fifth quadrant lord, but fifth and sixth in the fourth, fifth. So mixing fourth, fifth, and sixth houses, right? As well as the ascendant lord, MC lord, sorry, MC lord, career, right? Um, so very, Uranian careers, so something like very exotic or uh, dynamic, explosive, interesting, Uranian, progressive, just sudden. But yeah, so Moon is in the dominant position, right? Moon's in Scorpio, so it's very powerful. Moon is ruling the eighth cusp, also a very powerful house, very dynamic. It's dispositing Pluto in Cancer, which, the Pluto in Cancer generation, the women really rose to prominence, right? In that generation. And so that this is and it's in harmony. It's not exactly trine. I mean, well, it's trine by 5 degrees so Moon is dignifying this Pluto and this eighth house. So like very, very dominant, right? And it being a night chart and her being a woman, um, she greatly identifies with her moon more than even her sun. So this is a very, very dominant moon. And she was the dominant personality. And they said in her movies, in her acting, she was just playing herself, really. She was just being herself, her dominant self. And she was hard to work with. The directors, wanted to, I read, break her will, quote unquote, like, because probably, I mean, she was just so dominant, just so forceful. Moon in Scorpio, even though it's not great dignity, it's a very powerful, especially if somebody who identifies with their moon. A woman in a night chart is going to identify with their moon. Moon's in the upper half, so it's like when she was born, the moon was visible. So it's a pretty bright moon, not fully bright, but in harmony with the sun and the Pisces stellium here. You could say, well, 3 planets, an asteroid, north node there. But yeah, it was a very powerful, dominant moon that is dominating over her career, right? The public. Venus represents the public for her, which is having to do with her, yeah, fifth house entertainment, but also fourth house. So something about her youth or her childhood or her parents, um, homeland, as well as, you know, it's tying in fifth and sixth. So like daily work, daily grind, entertainment, all of it, right? That she was dominating over it. Her eighth house, her psychology, her power over others, right? In groups, in networks. 11th house, 12th house, 12th whole sign house. So 11th, 12th, creativity, movies. Just this incredibly dominant woman, powerful, right? Van Gogh, Van Gogh. Okay. Okay, so I see the ascendant and then moon applying. So moon is the ascendant lord, and it's sixth, it's in conjunct from the ascendant. So this gives him, first of all, this ties the moon to his ascendant by 1 degree, but still moon moves quite fast, so it's pretty close, right? So this gives him great expressive ability with his emotions, right? But it's in the sixth house, so it embodies in the same way that um, um, Jimi Hendrix had the opposite Inconjunct, where his ascendant lord was eighth from the ascendant, and he embodied this very powerful dynamic, right? With the eighth house, also dying young, but just this very powerful quality. Van Gogh had the opposite, where his ascendant lord was sixth from the ascendant. So he also embodies the Inconjunct, but in a more subservient way, right? And if you read about Van Gogh, or you know anything about his life, he never sold a painting in his life, right? It's partially due to this Saturn in the 11th. Even though Mars is his, you know, um, malefic out of sect, which also it's conjunct the MC, so that's another indication that he had a difficult career. Not a deal breaker though, because some people. Anyway, that's another story. He was subservient. He was very sixth house. He was very hardworking, daily grind, very modest, humble. Um, and he did not consider himself a great successful painter because he wasn't that when he was alive. So this he embodied this very sixth house Inconjunct quality. Uh, brilliant artist. It's just that he didn't even have any success in his life while he was alive. All his success came after he was dead. So it's very unfortunate. Also, South Node conjunct Ascendant Lord and Jupiter. Um, shows, yeah, I mean, that's very sensitive, but it shows success when young, but not necessarily when older. Um, yeah, which he did not have a fortunate ending. And sixth house, health issues and whatnot. So yeah, he's embodying the sixth house Inconjunct, right? Subservient. He relied on his brother for everything, Theo, right? And his other friends and whatnot. So yeah. Last we have Gianni Versace, another fashion designer, um, very successful. And here we see Moon in conjunct Pluto applying. You know what? I have to use the bathroom. Right back. Hold on, back. Versace. Right. Let's see. Pluto, Moon, right, with Moon in the dominant position. Moon ruling the 8th house. So it's a very powerful moon in the 4th house, in the very creative sign of Pisces. So 4th house has to do with building things, building physical things. So the other designers, we saw a very strong 2nd house influence. Here we're seeing a more 4th house influence, right? With a very powerful moon in creative Pisces, building physical things, creative Piscean things, right? Dominating over this 9th house Pluto, Saturn. So, let's see, Pluto, well, you could tie it to the 1st house, I guess you could say. Also Saturn, you could bring in Saturn because by association it's connected 2nd and 3rd house. So the aesthetics as well. Saturnian aesthetics, Leo is very creative, right? But this moon in Pisces is even more creative, especially because Saturn. And then Pluto, obsessive, ego. Yeah, so this has to do with studies. I don't know what he studied, to be honest, but philosophy. Yeah, somehow like so his belief system was really dominated by a very creative moon in the 4th house in Pisces. So this yeah, so this he was a creative person, in other words. He was very creative. He powerfully creative. So 8th house deals with shared resources, so he might have had some help from other people, right? I don't know his story, to be honest, like, but perhaps his maybe a partner, his wife, um or maybe he got a loan from somebody, but or maybe some sort of inheritance, but the creative building, creating something physical material that was beautiful and artistic was really dominating over this obsessive. This is a very, very serious conjunction. Saturn conjunct Pluto conjunct Saturn, right? In Leo. It's very heavy, very focused. So in other words, like he's going to be extremely driven and focused and serious in service to his creativity and building something out of that. Something like beautiful and refined and Piscean, right? Not to mention he also has a lot of 12th house influence here. Neptune is trying the North Node, right? So there's other factors, but as far as this goes, yeah, that's the serious, hardworking or studying or 9th house philosophy belief system is serving this creativity. So the creative element is dominant for Versace. Okay. That's the main thing here. All right. Is there any more? That is it. Okay, but I think I really demonstrated how when you have an inconjunct, the planet that is in the more dominant side of things rules over the planet that's in the more submissive side. So even if somebody's sun is in conjunct another planet, that other planet might overtake the sun and be the dominant personality quality that the person has. Like in the case of like Clint Eastwood with Saturn on the one hand and Sun in Gemini, he's much more Saturnian than Geminian, right? You can make it. I mean, obviously the Gemini is still there, the influence is still there, but that Saturn is going to be so dominant, right? You're really going to see that Saturn. And in his case, it was in Capricorn in the 2nd house retrograde. So like that's the defining quality of his personality. It's that Saturn in Capricorn. Right? So yeah, so it's really interesting. So like, I mean, the main objection I have is that people say, oh, it's an inversion. They don't have anything to do with each other. They're not related. They can't see each other. They can't connect. They can't relate to each other. Bullshit. They fucking relate to each other. It's just one side's dominating the other, right? And if it's exact, it's very much dominating the other side, right? So look at your inconjuncts. Don't just say, oh, they're nothing to do with each other. They can't relate. They can't communicate. Bullshit. They do. They do communicate. They're just, it's unequal relationships. So it's one side dominating the other. That's what it is. Sixth house, eighth house. So, yeah, I hope I didn't fuck up the end. Hope it recorded anyway. All right, well, we'll find out. All right, guys. Mediocre astrologer signing off. May he's okay. I hope you're okay. I hope you're doing better okay than okay. And you know, my situation is not resolved, but you know, for now, I just can't spend every moment crying about it, whining about it, worrying about it. Just got to make, you know, move on, just and hope for the best and do everything I can. And the rest is up to God. But anyway, guys, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Book a reading with me. You know, it'll still help me out a lot, tremendously. Or if you can recommend me to somebody else who needs or wants a reading. If you want a secondary reading, I also do synastry readings. You can book a synastry reading. Or if you just want an update about like timing and things like that, book another reading with me. Just email me, macrogoldmachine@yahoo.com. Other than that, guys, I will see you again soon. Laugh it off, take a victory laugh, win before you win, all that good stuff, guys. You know what to do. All right. I'll see you again soon. Bye.